a very difficult first question. What's the most important thing to keep in mind? I think I'll turn that slightly and say that it's how you search for what the most important thing is. That's the most important thing. So it's the search. It's basically having, I don't think that there is one thing, because when you're constructing in existing situations, they can be so varied in terms of their values and their qualities that to search for something would be to miss the point. I think that in many cases you try and find what it is that makes the place the way it is. Some of those things may be visible, like a type of construction, a certain building traditions, a certain topography, a certain climate. Others may be invisible. They may be to do with a kind of, almost like a social history or even a legal history. Or it may even be in all the things that you can't quite explain, that you can study a certain number of conditions, physical ones, built ones, but there are certain things that always remain slightly mysterious. And I think I'm going to talk about that this evening, but it's about how you untie some of those mysteries, and the ones that you can't untie, how you make not knowing just as productive as knowing. So I suppose that it's a certain kind of curiosity, I think, is the most important thing. Not to take what you see to be the truth, that actually in existing conditions there's always multiple layers. And the exciting thing about making something new there is to try and somehow synthesize those things creatively. Yes, I think it'll be a bigger and bigger part of our kind of subject. I think even so much as I would probably go so far as to say that actually during modernism, adaptation, constructing in existing situations was seen as a sort of a minor field compared with the modernist project, which was about the new. I think that in the next century, in your generation, actually new buildings will be a subset of reuse, and reuse will be the principal reality that we live in. I think it goes back a little bit to the first question, which is about, there's a certain amount of technical knowledge that you can share, that they get from other people as well in the department, in construction courses, history courses. I think the thing that I try to do within the kind of design studio context is to try and provoke the kind of curiosity that I was talking about earlier on. So I would say that it's about trying to establish certain methodologies to do with looking, to do with researching, to do with examining the condition that you find, to try and describe it as objectively as possible. And I think that that's done through drawing, through model making, even possibly through text, depending on the situation. But I think that the act of design starts with the act of looking. What you design, what you choose to look at, totally determines what you do. If you decide that you become obsessed with plant life, your design trajectory will take a different turn than if you're obsessed with the infrastructure, or if you decide that you want to look at typology, or if you decide you want to look at a material landscape. All those things become the first design decision that you make. Now, hopefully you make them broadly enough that you can start drawing connections between things, because of course they're almost always related to one another. Yeah. The way that people make roofs is almost certainly related to climate, which will be related to plant life and to the infrastructure. Now, how you find the line through that is the methodology. And I think that is how you penetrate the kind of field of construction, which I sort of see construction and design as being more or less the same thing. Well, they do. I mean, what you find is always a starting point. So I think there's a certain natural way of responding to certain material conditions, certain building traditions, certain cultures, which are in the ground or all around you. I would say that goes up to a point, and at the same time, architecture is deeply related to trade, and so and architectural knowledge has been traded. So I would never say that, because you're working in one place, you need to work in a certain material. Actually, that would probably fossilize architecture instantly. I think there are certain big traditions that run through. The north of Europe is more organic and timbery. The south of Europe is more mineral, stony, bricky. That's climate, that's geology. But that's not to say that you can't have fine stone buildings in Scandinavia and very fine timber buildings in Italy. So you're sort of, and in different parts of Europe, the middle of Europe, I'd say that Britain, possibly quite a big chunk of Germany, is sort of halfway between, and actually you'll find a bit of everything. So I would say that yes, it is important to try and understand the materiality that you find immediately in front of you, but you have to remain critical that that's not the only materiality. I would say that most of the timber in London doesn't come from London. It comes from the Baltic states, and that's because shipping was established for lots of reasons, and so things move. Things move a very long way. There's another example where there's this amazing stone quarry on the island of Brač in Croatia. They've been quarrying there continuously since the Roman times. And all the cutting happens in Italy, across the Adriatic Sea. Right. So now, if you build a house in that stone in Brač, 1 kilometer away from the quarry, they will still take it all the way to Italy to cut it and bring it back. Because that's where the skill is, that's where the material is, and you cannot move the skill instantly. So materials and skill will always move around in probably a slightly more complex way, in fact, in a much more complex way than somehow the idea that something is local. I think that probably nothing's been local probably since the middle of the 18th century. But it's a kind of, I think it's a really important one to be aware of. I think that you could do an interesting world map of this room. Where does that bit of beach come from? Where does that bit of metal come from? Where does this cedar come from? And then you've got oak there. You've already got, 4 forests, very different forests. I would be surprised, although it's possible, but I would be surprised if they were all in Germany. But I don't know, maybe that's an exercise to do later.